The silence was the first thing that struck him. It was a dense, unnatural quiet, the kind that settles in the moments after a loud noise has abruptly stopped, leaving a ringing in its wake. Liam stood in the doorway of the small house he had poured his life into, the scent of sawdust and his own sweat still clinging to his work clothes. The air inside should have smelled of Chloe's jasmine perfume, and the dinner she was usually starting around this time. Instead, it was stale, holding only the ghost of her presence. A premonition, cold and sharp as a nail, pricked the base of his skull. If stories about resilience, the price of loyalty, and the kind of love that survives the wreckage speak to you, stay with me. He walked through the living room, his steel-toed boots feeling clumsy and loud on the hardwood floors he had laid, and polished himself. Every object in the room was a testament to his labor, a monument to their shared life. The bookshelf he had built from reclaimed timber, the mantelpiece he had carved over a long winter, the very walls he had framed and painted. They were meant to be the skeleton of their future, but now they felt like the bones of something already dead. His gaze swept the room, cataloguing the absences. Her coat was gone from its hook by the door. The stack of fashion magazines she always left on the coffee table had vanished. A small, hollow space had opened up on the wall where her favorite painting, a garish splash of colors he never understood but tolerated, used to hang. The kitchen was where he found it. Placed with cruel, surgical precision in the exact center of the granite countertop he'd installed just last spring, was a single folded sheet of paper. Next to it, catching the dying light from the window, sat her wedding ring. The gold band and the small, perfect diamond seemed to mock him, a tiny, brilliant star of betrayal. His hands, calloused and stained with grease from a long day wrestling with a stubborn transmission at the garage, felt suddenly alien and dirty. He hesitated, a strange reluctance holding him back, as if not touching the note would make it unreal. But the silence in the house was a physical weight, pressing down on him, forcing him to confront the truth. He picked up the note. The paper was expensive, thick and creamy, not the cheap legal pad stationery they kept by the phone. Her handwriting, a looping, elegant script, filled the page. It was not a letter filled with anguish or regret. It was a statement of facts, a closing of accounts. She wrote that she couldn't live like this anymore, the constant struggle, the waiting for a someday that never seemed to arrive. She had met someone. His name was Julian. He could give her the life she deserved, a life free from the smell of motor oil and the worry of next month's mortgage payment. She said she was sorry for the way it happened, but not for the decision itself. It was a clean, brutal amputation. Liam read it twice, then a third time, but the words refused to assemble into any meaning beyond a dull, roaring pain in his chest. It was the detached, businesslike tone that wounded him most. It was as if their entire marriage had been a poorly performing asset she was finally liquidating. He sank onto one of the kitchen stools, the note crinkling in his fist. He looked at his hands, at the grime worked deep into the lines of his knuckles. These were the hands that had fixed her car, built her furniture, and held her while she slept. They were hands that built things, that made things work. And yet, they had failed to hold his own life together. A new sound finally broke the silence. It was a faint shuffling from upstairs. For a wild, illogical second, hope flared in his chest, a mistake, a cruel joke. But the sound was followed by a soft, tentative cough, and he remembered the secondary burden. His younger sister, Maya, had come to stay with them 2 months ago after her life had taken a sharp, downward turn. Chloe had been less than thrilled, her tolerance wearing thin with each passing week. Maya was a fragile thing, a piece of delicate glass in Liam's world of iron and concrete. And Chloe had left her behind too. Another piece of unwanted baggage. The full weight of it all crashed down on him then. It wasn't just his heart that was broken. His life was now a structural collapse. He was a builder, staring at a demolition site. But the true horror was the discovery he made an hour later, after he had finally climbed the stairs and assured a worried Maya that everything was fine, a lie that felt like swallowing sand. While searching for a bank statement in the desk they had shared, he found a separate folder hidden beneath a stack of old invoices. It was filled with credit card statements, all in Chloe's name, all addressed to a post office box he never knew existed. The numbers were staggering. Thousands upon thousands of dollars spent on clothes, spa treatments, weekend trips he hadn't known she'd taken. The debt was a crushing secret avalanche she had triggered, and he was the one left to be buried beneath it. The note on the counter hadn't been an apology. It had been an invoice. The first few weeks were a blur of numb autopilot. Liam moved through his days like a ghost haunting his own life. The world had been muted, its colours washed out, its sounds muffled by the constant low hum of anxiety in his ears. He got up before dawn, the chill of the empty space in his bed a fresh wound each morning. He would make coffee, the ritual mechanical and joyless, and check on Maya, who seemed to be shrinking, her presence in the house as quiet and apologetic as a shadow. Then he would drive to the garage, the familiar scent of gasoline and hot metal, a small, anchoring reality in the chaos of his thoughts. At work, he functioned. His hands knew what to do, even when his mind was 1,000 miles away, replaying Chloe's words, seeing her face, feeling the phantom weight of her ring in his palm. He would lose himself in the intricate logic of an engine, the satisfying click of a socket wrench, the precise torque needed to tighten a bolt. It was a world of cause and effect, where problems had tangible solutions. He could diagnose a misfire, trace a faulty wire, rebuild a carburetor until it hummed with perfect efficiency. But he couldn't diagnose the rot that had hollowed out his marriage. He couldn't fix the gaping hole in his life. His boss, a gruff, older man named Frank, watched him with shrewd, sympathetic eyes, but said nothing, a kindness for which Liam was profoundly grateful. The nights were the worst. The house, once a sanctuary, was now a hostile environment. Every corner held a memory, every object was an accusation. He tried to clean, to erase her, but her scent lingered in the closets, a faint trace of jasmine that would ambush him when he was least expecting it, a gut punch of remembered intimacy. He found a single, long blonde hair on his pillow and stared at it for a full minute before the rage, hot and sudden, made him rip the sheets from the bed and throw them in a heap on the floor. He started sleeping on the sofa, the unfamiliar lumps a welcome distraction from the perfect, cold emptiness of their marital bed. He was drowning, not in a sudden torrent, but in a slow, inexorable rise of muddy water. The bills Chloe had left behind were a constant, suffocating pressure. Final demand notices began to appear in the mail, their red ink like slashes of a blade. He took on extra shifts, working late into the night until his muscles screamed and his bones ached with a fatigue that went deeper than physical exhaustion. He ate standing up in the kitchen, cheap canned soup that tasted of tin and despair. He saw the worry in Maya's eyes as he grew thinner, the skin stretched tight over his cheekbones, his own eyes shadowed and haunted. He was trying to be strong for her, but he felt like a crumbling, retaining wall, cracks spidering across his surface, threatening a total collapse. The breaking point came not with a dramatic explosion, but with a small, mundane failure. It was a Tuesday night, close to midnight. He had been at the garage for 14 hours, wrestling with a vintage muscle car whose owner was demanding perfection. He had finally gotten home, the smell of grease and frustration clinging to him like a second skin. Maya was asleep. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. He was hungry, but the thought of preparing food was overwhelming. He just needed to clean up, to wash the filth of the day away. He walked into the small workshop he'd built in the garage, his sanctuary. He reached for a heavy wrench on the workbench, his hand clumsy with exhaustion. His fingers fumbled and the wrench slipped, falling to the concrete floor with a loud, clattering clang that echoed in the cavernous space. It was a simple, stupid mistake. But in that moment, the sound was like a gunshot. It was the sound of one more thing breaking, one more thing he had dropped, and he just stopped. He stood perfectly still, staring at the wrench on the floor. It was a tool, something to build with, to fix things with. And it was useless lying there on the cold, hard ground, just like him. A wave of utter, absolute futility washed over him. The endless work, the mounting debt, the hollow ache in his chest, the crushing responsibility for his sister. It all converged into a single, unbearable point of pressure. His knees buckled. He didn't fall so much as fold, sinking to the grimy concrete floor amidst the scattered nuts and bolts and the faint smell of spilled oil. He pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around them, and for the first time since he had found the note, he let the facade crumble. A sound tore from his throat, a raw, ragged sob that was half a scream. It was the sound of a man who had carried an impossible weight for too long and had finally been broken by it. He wept, his body shaking with deep, shuddering gasps, the tears carving clean tracks through the grease on his cheeks. He had hit the bottom. The concrete was cold and unforgiving beneath him, and there was nowhere left to fall. The cold of the concrete eventually seeped into his bones, a hard, clarifying chill that slowly quieted the storm inside him. He lay there for what felt like hours, the echoes of his own brokenness fading into the silence of the garage. The smell of oil and metal, once a source of pride, now seemed like the scent of his own failure. He stared up at the exposed rafters, the sturdy beams he had installed himself, and saw them not as a roof over his head, but as a cage. He was trapped by debt, by grief, by a future that had been stolen from him. Then through the small, grimy window of the garage, he saw a light flick on in the house. Maya. The thought of her, alone in that quiet house, depending on a man who was currently crumpled on a garage floor, was like a jolt of electricity. She was his responsibility. A responsibility Chloe had discarded as easily as an old pair of shoes, but one he could not. She was the last piece of the structure still standing. If he collapsed, she would come down with him. Was this it? Was this how he would let it end? Defeated on a dirty floor, surrendering to the wreckage. Something shifted deep within him. It wasn't a sudden surge of hope or a flash of inspiration. It was a cold, hard spark of something else, defiance, a flicker of the same stubborn grit that allowed him to wrestle a seized engine into submission, to work until his hands were raw to get a job done right. He had spent his life building things, fixing things. He looked at the mess of his life not as a tragedy, but as a new kind of project, a demolition and rebuild. The foundation was shattered, the framework compromised. Fine, he would tear it all down to the bedrock and start again. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up. His muscles ached, his eyes were swollen, but as he got to his feet, he felt a subtle change in his own internal architecture. The crushing weight was still there, but he was no longer just bearing it. He was preparing to lift it. He made a decision, a silent vow whispered into the cold air of the garage. He would stop sinking. He would start building. The first step was the hardest. The next morning, he went to the small, velvet-lined box hidden in the back of his sock drawer. Inside lay his father's watch. It was a simple, elegant timepiece, a reward for a lifetime of honest work. It was the only thing of real value his father had left him, a symbol of a different kind of wealth, the wealth of integrity and perseverance. The thought of selling it felt like a betrayal. But as he looked at its steady ticking second hand, he didn't see the past anymore. He saw time he was running out of. He saw the red-inked bills on the counter. This was not a surrender of his father's legacy. It was an investment in his own. That afternoon, he walked into a pawn shop and walked out with a fraction of its worth in cash, the weight on his wrist replaced by a grim, necessary lightness in his pocket. With that money, he didn't just pay the most urgent bill. He enrolled in a night course for a construction management certification. The tuition took almost everything he had left. It was a gamble, a bet on himself. The days became a grueling, relentless cycle. 14 hours at the garage, wrestling with engines and transmissions, his hands perpetually stained with grease. A quick, tasteless dinner. Then 3 hours at the community college, his mind struggling to shift from the tangible world of mechanics to the abstract world of logistics, blueprints, and budget projections. He would get home after midnight, his brain buzzing with new information, and fall into a dead sleep for 4 hours before starting all over again. It was during this time that he truly met Isabel. She was the instructor of his project management class. She was nothing like Chloe. Where Chloe was soft and decorative, Isabel was sharp lines and focused energy. She moved with a sense of purpose, her dark hair often pulled back in a severe but practical knot. She spoke with a clarity and precision that Liam, a man of tangible results, found himself admiring. Her eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, missed nothing. She noticed the grease that, no matter how hard he scrubbed, never fully left the crevices of his fingernails. She saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes, but she also saw the way he absorbed every lesson, the way his practical, hands-on knowledge gave him an intuitive grasp of the material that the younger students lacked. Their first real conversation happened after class one night. He had stayed behind to ask a question about load-bearing calculations, a concept he was trying to visualize in terms of engine blocks and chassis stress. She listened patiently, then walked him through it, not with abstract formulas, but by drawing a quick, clean diagram on the whiteboard, relating it to the principles of a hydraulic press. For the first time, someone was speaking his language. "You have a builder's mind, Liam," she said, her tone matter of fact. "You don't just see the numbers, you see the structure underneath. Most people don't have that." He just nodded, unused to praise, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. She wasn't offering pity. She was offering respect. And in his world, respect was a currency far more valuable than cash. She was the first person to see him not as a broken man, but as a man who knew how to build. The next 7 years were a testament to the slow, inexorable power of the grind. Time became a blur of relentless work, a montage measured not in days or weeks, but in milestones of concrete and steel. The narrative of Liam's life was rewritten one grueling day at a time. The initial phase was the hardest, a brutal test of endurance. He lived in a state of perpetual motion and exhaustion. His world narrowed to 3 locations: Frank's garage, the community college classroom, and the quiet, strained atmosphere of his home. He sold his truck to buy a cheaper, more fuel-efficient sedan, the act feeling like severing another limb. Every dollar was accounted for, every expenditure scrutinized. Luxuries were a forgotten language. His relationship with Frank at the garage began to change. The gruff old mechanic saw the fire in Liam's eyes, the raw determination that burned away the exhaustion. He started giving Liam more responsibility, not just fixing cars, but helping with inventory, customer relations, and supplier negotiations. "You've got a head for more than just spark plugs," Frank grunted one afternoon, watching Liam streamline the parts ordering process with a simple spreadsheet he'd designed. It was Frank who, seeing Liam poring over construction textbooks during his lunch break, gave him his first real break from the world of grease. Frank's brother owned a small but respected construction firm, and Frank made a call. Liam started as a grunt on a job site on weekends, his only free days forgoing sleep to haul lumber and mix concrete. His body screamed in protest, but his mind soared. He was finally on the ground floor of the world he wanted to conquer. The certifications he earned at night were his keys: construction management, project bidding, AutoCAD. Each one opened a new door. The construction company, impressed by his work ethic and his unique combination of hands-on knowledge and theoretical understanding, offered him a full-time position as a junior foreman. It was a pay cut from his senior mechanic's salary, and the overtime he was pulling, another sacrifice. But it was a step onto the right ladder. He traded the familiar weight of a wrench for the crisp authority of a clipboard. His hands, though still rough, began to spend more time gripping a pen than a ratchet. He was learning the language of power, not the brute force of a breaker bar, but the strategic leverage of a well-executed contract. During this time, his connection with Isabel deepened, evolving from a student-teacher dynamic into a partnership forged in the quiet hours of shared struggle. After he finished her class, he would occasionally email her with a question about a real-world problem he was facing on site. She always responded, her replies concise and brilliant. Soon, emails turned into occasional coffees where they would talk shop for hours. She was an architect working for a large, impersonal firm where she felt her creativity was stifled. She dreamed of designing buildings that were not just functional, but had soul. He dreamed of building them. They were two halves of a whole, the architect and the builder. Their romance was a slow burn, built on a foundation of mutual respect, not grand gestures. It was in the way she'd bring him coffee on site when she knew he'd been there since dawn. It was in the way he'd listen for hours as she talked about her design philosophies, understanding the passion behind the technical jargon. The first time he truly let her in was a year into his new career. They were walking near a new development, and he found himself telling her about Chloe, the debt, the garage floor. He laid out the raw, ugly truth of his collapse. She didn't offer platitudes or pity. She simply reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. "A foundation has to be cleared before you can build something stronger," she said quietly. It was in that moment he realized he was no longer just rebuilding his life. He was building a new one with her. Maya, too, began to heal. With the crushing financial pressure slowly easing and a new, calmer stability entering the house, she started to find her footing. Liam encouraged her to take art classes, rediscovering a passion she had long suppressed. The house began to fill with the smell of paint and turpentine instead of just stale coffee and anxiety. She saw the change in her brother, the way he stood taller, the way the haunted look in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a focused, determined gleam. She adored Isabel, who treated her not as a burden, but as a friend. The ascent was steady, junior foreman to site supervisor to project manager. Liam's reputation grew. He was known for bringing projects in on time and under budget, for his uncanny ability to solve logistical nightmares, for the loyalty he inspired in his crews because he had been one of them. He never forgot the feel of cold steel in his hands on a winter morning. After 5 years, he and Frank, who had sold his garage and retired, pooled their resources. Along with Isabel, who had finally quit her corporate job, they took the biggest gamble of their lives. They started their own firm, Bedrock Construction and Design. It was a terrifying leap. The first 2 years were lean, a constant battle for contracts, a struggle to make payroll, but their synergy was undeniable. Isabel's designs were elegant and efficient. Liam's execution was flawless and cost-effective. Frank's old-world wisdom and contacts provided the ballast. They started with small renovations, then a custom home, then a small commercial building. Each success was a stepping stone to the next. By the end of the 7th year, Liam was unrecognizable from the broken man on the garage floor. He now wore tailored suits, though he still preferred the feel of a rugged work shirt. His hands were clean, the calluses faded, but not gone, a reminder of where he came from. His hair was showing threads of silver at the temples, but his eyes were clear and commanded respect in a boardroom. Bedrock was no longer a small startup. It was a major player in the city's development, known for its integrity and quality. He and Isabel lived together in a minimalist, beautiful apartment she had designed, overlooking the city skyline that they were now helping to shape. He had paid off every last cent of Chloe's debt. He had built an empire not of flashy wealth, but of solid, unshakable competence. He was not just a builder anymore, he was a founder. The past has a way of showing up unannounced. For Liam, it arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, 7 years after it had departed. He was in his office, a corner suite on the top floor of a sleek, modern building that Bedrock had just completed. The room was a reflection of him and Isabel, minimalist design, clean lines and a massive window offering a panoramic view of the city. He was reviewing the final schematics for their most ambitious project yet, a 50-story residential tower that would redefine the skyline, when his assistant buzzed him. "Liam, there's a woman here to see you, a Chloe Martin. She doesn't have an appointment." The name hit him like a physical blow, a ghost limb aching with a long-healed injury. Chloe. He hadn't spoken her name, hadn't even let himself think it, in years. He felt a strange, cold calm settle over him. He had wondered if this day would ever come, and now that it was here, he felt surprisingly prepared. He had spent years reinforcing his own foundations, building walls not of anger, but of solid, unbreachable peace. "Send her in," he said, his voice even. She walked in, and for a moment he was struck by how much she had changed, and yet how much she had stayed the same. The expensive clothes were still there, but they looked worn, the designer handbag scuffed at the corners. The confident, almost arrogant posture he remembered was gone, replaced by a brittle tension. Her face, once smooth and radiant, was etched with fine lines of stress around her eyes and mouth. The life she had chosen, the one of no struggle, had clearly involved a different kind of struggle altogether. She was a building with a beautiful facade that was beginning to show the cracks in its shoddy foundation. "Liam," she breathed, her voice a carefully constructed mix of awe and fragility. She took in the office, the view, the tailored suit he wore. Her eyes, wide and calculating, were doing a rapid appraisal of his net worth. I can't believe it. This is amazing. I always knew you had it in you." The lie was so bald, so transparent, it was almost laughable. He remained seated behind his large oak desk, a solid barrier between them. He didn't stand. He didn't offer her a seat. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. "What do you want, Chloe?" he asked. The question was not unkind, but it was devoid of warmth. It was the question of a man dealing with an unexpected and unwelcome business matter. Her performance began. She moved further into the room, her movements tentative, designed to elicit sympathy. She spoke of Julian, the man she had left him for. His investments had been a house of cards, built on fraud and bad deals. It had all collapsed a few months ago. The money was gone, the cars, the houses, the life of effortless luxury, all repossessed. Julian, she said with a tremor in her voice, had left her. He had blamed her for his downfall, for her expensive tastes. The irony was so thick, Liam could almost taste it. "I have nothing, Liam," she said, her eyes welling with practiced tears. "I'm staying on a friend's sofa. I didn't know where else to go. I kept thinking about us, about what we had. It was real, wasn't it? I was just young and stupid. I made a terrible mistake." She was trying to access the old Liam, the man who would have rushed to comfort her, to fix her problems. But that man was gone. He had been buried under years of hard labor, night classes, and relentless determination. The man sitting before her was a different person, one she had never met. He saw her plea not as a cry for help, but as a strategic maneuver. She was not remorseful for leaving him. She was remorseful that her bet had not paid off. He listened in silence, his hands steepled in front of him. He let her talk, let her spin her web of regret and nostalgia. She spoke of their dreams, of the life they were supposed to build together, conveniently forgetting that she had been the one to sign the demolition order. When she finally fell silent, her tear-filled eyes pleading with him, he still said nothing for a long moment. The silence in the room was a different kind than the one that had greeted him in their empty house 7 years ago. That silence had been a void. This one was a weapon. It was filled with his power, his patience, his complete and utter control of the situation. "I see," he said, finally, his voice still quiet, still calm. "You're in a difficult position." He stood up, and for a second a flicker of hope crossed her face. She thought he was coming to her, to offer an embrace, a solution. Instead, he walked to the window, turning his back on her, and looked out at the city. His city. "The thing is, Chloe," he said, his gaze fixed on a distant crane, "another bedrock project breaking ground. The life you're nostalgic for, the man you remember, they don't exist anymore. You burned that house down, and I built an entirely new world from the ashes." He turned back to face her, his eyes cold and clear as glass. "There is nothing for you here." Her face hardened. The mask of the victim slipped, revealing the raw, grasping desperation beneath. She had miscalculated. The direct appeal to pity, her opening gambit, had failed spectacularly. The soft, pliable man she remembered had been replaced by this cold, immovable stranger. Anger, sharp and ugly, flashed in her eyes. The tears dried up instantly. If she couldn't get what she wanted through seduction and sympathy, she would get it through other means. "Nothing for me?" she scoffed, her voice losing its fragile tremor and taking on a hard, metallic edge. "Don't be so sure, Liam. You seem to be forgetting something. We are still married." Liam's expression didn't change. He had, of course, not forgotten. He had filed for divorce a year after she left, but she had vanished, leaving no forwarding address, and his attempts to serve her with papers had been met with a dead end. He had been advised by his lawyer at the time to let it lie to avoid a costly and complicated search. It had been a loose thread, one he had always intended to snip. Now she was pulling on it. "In this state," she continued, a smug, triumphant smile beginning to form on her lips, "that means that half of all this is mine. Bedrock construction, this fancy office, The apartment I'm sure you live in. I am legally entitled to 50% of everything you've built since I left. My lawyer was very clear on that point. There it was, the blackmail. It wasn't about love or regret or second chances. It was about money. It had always been about money. She saw his success not as something he had earned through grit and sacrifice, but as a lottery ticket she just happened to hold a claim to. She believed she had him trapped, that his own success had become his greatest vulnerability. "I don't want to be unreasonable," she said, her voice dripping with false magnanimity. "I'm not looking to destroy you, just a settlement, a fair one, enough to get back on my feet. Say, a few million? It's a small price to pay to make me go away quietly. Otherwise, this gets very public and very, very messy. Local success stories: abandoned wife returns to claim her share." The headlines write themselves. She stood there, radiating a triumphant confidence. She believed she had played a trump card. She mistook his continued silence for shock, for the dawning horror of a man realizing he was caught in a trap. What she couldn't see was the intricate network of legal and financial fortifications he had been constructing for years, with the same meticulous care he used to plan a skyscraper's foundation. She thought she was attacking a house of cards. She had no idea she was running headlong into a fortress wall. He let the threat hang in the air for a moment longer, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. "You're right," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "This does need to be settled. Let's have dinner, tonight. We can discuss the terms of your settlement." A slow, victorious smile spread across Chloe's face. He was caving. It was working. "I know the perfect place," she said. "Le Vautour. It's expensive. I trust you can afford it now." Le Vautour. 8 o'clock, Liam agreed, his face an unreadable mask. "Come alone." She practically glided out of his office, convinced of her victory. As the door closed behind her, Liam picked up his phone. He didn't call a lawyer. He called Isabel. "It's happened," he said. "Everything is in motion. I need you there tonight." Then he made a second call to his actual lawyer, a man named Davies. "The Vulture it is, Mr. Davies. 8 o'clock. The table next to mine. It's time." He was not preparing for a negotiation. He was preparing for a controlled demolition. Le Vautour, which translated to The Vulture, was the kind of restaurant Chloe had always adored. It was a place designed for performance, where the astronomical prices were secondary to the act of being seen spending the money. The lighting was low and dramatic, the waiters moved with theatrical silence, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and quiet, self-satisfied wealth. Liam arrived first, deliberately dressed not in his power suit, but in a simple, well-made dark sweater and trousers. He looked understated, a man of substance, not flash. He chose a small, discreet table for two. A few minutes later, a portly, grey-haired man in a rumpled but expensive suit took a seat at an adjacent table, ordered a glass of scotch, and opened a newspaper. It was Mr. Davies, Liam's lawyer, playing the part of an uninterested diner. Chloe arrived exactly 15 minutes late, a power move she had likely learned from Julian. She had changed into a slinky black dress, a desperate attempt to recapture the glamour of her former life. She had brought friends, 2 women with equally hungry eyes and predatory smiles. It was an ambush, an attempt to put him on the defensive, to have an audience for his humiliation and her triumph. Liam simply rose, pulled out a chair for her, and nodded politely at her companions as they squeezed into the booth. He was unflustered. "Liam, darling, I hope you don't mind. I brought Candace and Tiffany," Chloe said, her voice bright and brittle. "I was just telling them all about how we were catching up. They were so thrilled to hear you're doing so well." The subtext was clear. We're all witnesses. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Chloe and her friends spoke in loud, carrying voices, ensuring the nearby tables could hear. They asked him about his work with a condescending curiosity, as if he were a clever pet who had learned a surprising new trick. Chloe steered the conversation, painting a picture for her friends of their shared past, heavily edited to cast her as the supportive, long-suffering partner, and him as the sweet but unambitious dreamer she had been forced to leave behind. "He was always so talented with his hands," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "But I had to push him, you know, to think bigger. I'm just so glad it finally paid off for him, even if—" She trailed off, dabbing a non-existent tear from her eye. Liam remained placid, a rock in the stream of her toxic narrative. He ate his meal with a slow, deliberate calm. He answered their questions with polite, brief responses. He offered nothing, his composure a quiet, infuriating defiance of the role she had cast for him. His stillness was unnerving her. She had expected him to be angry, or nervous, or pleading. This quiet control was not part of her script. Frustrated, she decided to escalate, to go for the kill. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial stage whisper that was louder than her normal tone. "It's just such a shame it's all so temporary," she said, shaking her head with faux sympathy. "I was talking to my lawyer, and it's just awful. With our situation and me needing to get my fair share, he's going to lose half of it. He's broke now, really, he just doesn't know it yet." The line hung in the air, a declaration of war disguised as pity. Candace and Tiffany looked at Liam with expressions of practiced sorrow. It was the moment she had been building towards, the moment of his public undoing. Liam carefully placed his fork and knife on his plate. He took a sip of water. He looked at Chloe, and for the first time that evening, he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the cold, satisfied smile of a master craftsman seeing a complex plan click perfectly into place. "Broke," he repeated softly, as if tasting the word. "That's an interesting perspective." At that exact moment, as if on cue, Mr. Davies folded his newspaper, stood up from the adjacent table, and walked over. He placed a thick leather portfolio on their table with a soft, definitive thud. "Evening, Liam," Davies said, his voice calm and authoritative. He nodded curtly at the three women. "Sorry to interrupt. Just needed your final signature on the acquisition papers." Chloe stared at him, confused. "Acquisition? What acquisition?" Davies looked at Liam, who gave a slight nod. "Liam's firm, Bedrock," the lawyer explained, his tone dry and professional, "has just finalized the acquisition of Sterling Conway Properties. The deal closed this afternoon. I imagine the press release will go out in the morning." Candace and Tiffany, who followed the city's business scene, gasped. Sterling Conway was one of the oldest, largest real estate conglomerates in the state. Acquiring them wasn't just a success. It was a coronation. It was empire building. Chloe looked from the lawyer to Liam, her mind struggling to process the scale of what she was hearing. This wasn't the man she'd left. This was a titan. The realization only strengthened her resolve. Her 50% share had just become exponentially more valuable. "Well," she said, recovering, a greedy light in her eyes. "Congratulations, Liam. That just makes our settlement negotiations all the more significant." "There will be no settlement," Liam said, his voice cutting through her avarice like a diamond blade through glass. He opened the portfolio Mr. Davies had left. It was not an acquisition paper. He pulled out a single document and slid it across the table to her. "What is this?" she demanded. "That," Liam said, "is a copy of the final court-stamped decree of our divorce. It was granted 2 years ago, in absentia." Chloe stared at the paper, her face a mask of disbelief. "What? That's not possible. I was never served." "Oh, you were," Mr. Davies chimed in, enjoying himself immensely. "We have the affidavits to prove it. We served notice to the last known address of your cohabiting partner, a Mr. Julian Croft. It seems in his haste to liquidate his assets, he forgot to give you his mail, a terrible oversight." Liam continued, his voice relentless and calm. "And this," he said, sliding a second set of documents across the table, "is a full accounting of the marital debt you left behind, which I paid in full, along with a detailed forensic analysis of the shell accounts you used. My lawyers advised me that had we gone to court, your clear pattern of financial fraud and abandonment would have entitled you to precisely nothing. In fact, you would have likely owed me." He let that sink in. The colour drained from Chloe's face. Her friends, Candice and Tiffany, were looking at her now, not with pity, but with a dawning horror and contempt. They were allies of a winner, not a fraud. "But the company," she stammered, grasping at the last straw. "Bedrock. You built it while we were still technically married. I'm entitled." "Bedrock Construction and Design is a limited liability partnership," Liam said, delivering the final crushing blow. "My ownership stake is held in a blind trust, established for the sole benefit of my sister, Maya. That trust was created the day before my divorce was finalized. Your legal claim, Chloe, is on assets that, for the last 2 years, I have not technically owned. Your 50% claim is 50% of nothing. You are entitled to nothing. You will get nothing." He stood up, tossing his napkin onto the table. He looked down at her, at the ruins of her pathetic, greedy scheme. He felt no anger, no triumph, just a profound, cleansing sense of release. He had not just defeated her, he had surgically removed her from his life, past, present, and future. He turned and saw Isabel standing near the entrance of the restaurant, watching him. She had been there the whole time, his silent, steadfast partner. Her expression was not one of triumph, but of quiet, unwavering support. He walked toward her, leaving Chloe and her friend sitting in stunned, humiliated silence at the table, the bill for their expensive meal lying there like a final insult. The cold night air felt clean and sharp as they stepped out of the restaurant. Liam took a deep breath, the first truly deep breath he felt he had taken in 7 years. It was as if a massive, invisible weight he had been carrying for so long had finally dissolved into nothing. He looked at Isabel, her face illuminated by the city lights, and a feeling of immense, quiet gratitude washed over him. The battle was over. The ghost had been vanquished. "Is it done?" she asked softly, her hand finding his. "It's done," he confirmed. The word felt small but momentous. The final bolt tightened on a massive structure. He felt no lingering anger toward Chloe, no desire for further revenge. There was only a vast, peaceful emptiness where the wound used to be. She was no longer a character in his story, not even a villain. She was just a passage from a book he had long since finished reading. His victory wasn't in her destruction, but in his own survival and the life he had built in spite of her. It was the quiet, profound satisfaction of looking at a completed project, knowing every beam was straight, every joint was strong, and the foundation was unshakable. He immediately turned his attention away from the past and toward the woman standing beside him, the true architect of his new life. She had been there through the grind, the late nights, the sacrifices. She had seen him at his weakest and had helped him find his strength. She hadn't just been a partner in his business, she had been the co-designer of his very soul. He intertwined his fingers with hers, the warmth of her hand a familiar, grounding presence. They began to walk, not speaking, their footsteps echoing in sync on the pavement. They walked past the glittering storefronts and the bustling crowds, moving away from the noise and the drama of Le Vautour toward the quieter, residential streets. They were heading toward the 50-story tower that was his current obsession, the one that was just a skeletal frame of steel against the night sky. From a nearby park, they could see its silhouette, a testament to ambition and resilience, their shared ambition and his personal resilience. They stood there for a long time, side by side, looking up at the structure. It was more than just steel and glass and concrete. It was a symbol. It was proof that you could build something magnificent from a cleared-out, desolate plot of land. It was his empire, but not in the way Chloe would have understood it. The empire wasn't the building, or the money, or the power. The empire was the peace in his own heart. It was the unwavering loyalty of his sister, now a successful artist in her own right. It was the steadfast partnership with the woman standing next to him. The empire was the family he had built from the wreckage. "It's going to be beautiful," Isabel said, her head resting on his shoulder. "We have a lot of work to do tomorrow," he replied, his voice filled not with the exhaustion of the grind, but with the quiet energy of purpose. The past was a blueprint that had been filed away, archived and complete. The future was an open schematic, waiting to be drawn, waiting to be built. He looked away from the tower and down at her, his partner, his architect, his home. The city lights reflected in her eyes. The noise of his past had finally faded into a complete and final silence, replaced by the steady, quiet rhythm of a life well and truly built. "Let's go home," he said,